Hello students, welcome to the lecture on managing ethical approaches, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the unconcerned or non-issue approach, discuss the damage control approach, discuss the compliance approach, explain the ethical culture approach, describe the company's ethical strategies. Let's begin with a brief introduction. Managing ethics in the workplace holds tremendous benefit for leaders and managers, benefits both moral and practical. This is particularly true today when it is critical to understand and manage highly diverse values in the workplace. However, today's training about business ethics is flawed.
What to do? My producer is a bully and hiring like-minded people. Ethics is becoming a question in my organization. I find few employees of my organization disclosing confidential client data to our competitors. Should the performance feedback session follow a corrective or punitive approach? All these are issues addressing common workplace ethics. Ethical problems are inevitable in all levels of business. Ethics is something you either have or you don't have. Ethics is something that is learned and chosen throughout one's life. In the workplace, the senior management have a responsibility to set an example that reflect the company expectations. Ethics is two-way. Employees having strong ethics in personal and professional life need no explanation, unlike those employees for whom work ethics is a growing problem. By the time employees hit the workforce, can they be taught things like ethics, or is it too late? Training on workplace ethics is imperative. Ethics help a lot in effective productivity as well as a great balance of responsibilities in your life on personal and professional front. Common workplace ethics: punctuality, responsibility, integrity, loyalty, teamwork, positive attitude, professionalism. How do you train your employees to be ethical to one and all, whether in the professional realm or personal? A written code of conduct defines ethics to be maintained in an organization. Each employee should have one, including new hires. Training programs. Organizations should focus on training in ethics at the workplace. A few members from the top-level management can lead the ethics training programs. Performance feedback sessions should be corrective in nature. Good behavior should be acknowledged. Role model. Seniors behaving in a morally upright manner will set an example for employees to follow.
The field of business ethics has traditionally been the domain of philosophers, academics, and social critics. Consequently, much of today's literature about business ethics is not geared towards the practical needs of leaders and managers, the people primarily responsible for managing ethics in the workplace. The most frequent forms of business ethics literature today typically include philosophical, which requires extensive orientation and analysis; anthologies, which require much time, review, and integration; case studies, which require numerous cases and much time and analysis to synthesize; and extended stories about businesses gone bad. This lack of practical information is not the fault of philosophers, academic, or social critics. The problem is the outcome of insufficient involvement of leaders and managers in discussion and literature about business ethics. Ethical problems that arise in a business environment. It applies to all aspects of business conduct and is relevant to the conduct of individuals and business organizations as a whole. Having an ethical business or organization has become less of a moral choice and more of a standard practice. So when operating a company today, it is important to plan how one's business will approach ethical conduct. The stance a company takes in dealing with or managing ethical conduct at any given point can take any of the four basic forms: unconcerned or non-issue approach, damage control approach, compliance approach, ethical culture approach. Let us now move on to the next topic, unconcerned approach. The unconcerned approach is prevalent at companies whose executives are immoral and unintentionally amoral. They believe the business of business is business, not ethics, and that if the law permits so-called unethical behavior, and if others are doing it too, why stand on ethical principles? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Companies in this mode are usually out to make the greatest possible profit at most any cost, and the strategies they employ, while legal, may well embrace elements that are ethically shady or unsavory for them. Ethics is a non-issue. Most approaches to ethics focus on individual behavior. In this chapter, a different approach is advocated, that of social ethics, which is offered as a complement to individual ethics. To some extent, this is an exercise in renaming some current activities, but it is also intended to clarify what is a distinct and valuable ethical approach that can be developed much further than it is at present. What is described here as social ethics is certainly practiced, but it is not usually treated as a subject for philosophical inquiry. Social ethics is taken here to be the ethical study of the options available to us in the social arrangements. Such arrangements involve those for two or more people to perform social functions, such as those pertaining to security, transportation, communication, reproduction and child rearing, education, and so forth. In technology, social ethics can mean studying anything from legislation to project management. Different arrangements have different ethical trade-offs, hence the importance of the subject. Studying ethics in technology means looking at both individual and collective behavior in the production, use, and disposal of technology. This broad scope may be contrasted with the best developed subtopic of professional ethics applied to engineering, which is concentrated on roles and responsibilities of working engineers. Let's look at the characteristics of unconcerned approach. Prevalent at companies whose executives are immoral and unintentionally amoral. Business ethics is an oxymoron in a survival of the fittest world. The business of business is business, not ethics. If the law permits unethical behavior, why stand on ethical principles? Companies are usually out to make greatest possible profit at most any cost. Strategies used, while legal, may embrace elements that are ethically shady. Moving on to the next topic, damage control approach. Damage control is favored at companies whose managers are intentionally amoral but who fear scandal and are desirous of containing any adverse fallout from claims that the company's strategy has unethical components or that company personnel engage in unethical practices. Companies using this approach, not wanting to risk tarnishing the reputations of key personnel or the company, usually make some concession to window dressing ethics, going so far as to adopt a code of ethics so that their executives can point to it as evidence of their ethical commitment should any ethical lapses on the company's part be exposed. Managers at these companies may opt to incorporate unethical elements into the company's strategy as long as those elements can be explained away or kept under wraps. Although unethical practices are not endorsed, executives look the other way when shady behavior occurs. Management's stance is one of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. except when there is great risk of fallout from inaction. Thus, they may condone questionable actions that help the company reach earnings targets or bolster its market standing, such as pressuring customers to stock up on the company's product, channel surfing, making under-the-table payments to win new business, stonewalling the recall of products claimed to be unsafe, bad-mouthing the products of rivals, or trying to keep prices low by sourcing goods from disreputable suppliers in low-wage countries that run sweatshop operations or use child labor. The main objective of the damage control approach is to protect against adverse publicity brought on by angry or vocal stakeholders, outside investigation, threats of litigation, or punitive government action, hence the need to make token gestures towards rejecting unethical behavior and instituting modest corporate governance safeguards. But at companies in a damage control mode, employees do not operate within a strong ethical context. There is a gap between talking ethics and walking ethics. The company's code of ethics exists merely as nice words on paper. Employees quickly gel the message that rule bending is tolerated if not condoned, and that unethical behavior will go unpunished or may even be rewarded unless it results in egregious harm or scandal that cannot be ignored. Let's now look at the characteristics of damage control approach. Favored at companies whose managers are intentionally amoral but who fear scandal. Managers are desirous of containing any adverse fallout from claims the company's strategy has unethical components. Companies often make some concession to window dressing ethics and may adopt a code of ethics. Managers may opt to incorporate unethical elements in the company's strategy as long as the elements can be explained away. Executives may look the other way when shady behavior occurs. Did you know the main objective of the demand control approach was to protect against adverse publicity and any damaging consequences brought on by headline in the media, outside investigation, threats of litigation, punitive government action, or angry or vocal stakeholder? Let us now study compliance approach in detail. Anywhere from light to forceful compliance is favored at companies whose managers lean toward being somewhat amoral but are highly concerned about having ethically upstanding reputations, or are moral and see strong compliance methods as the best way to impose and enforce ethical rules and high ethical standards. Companies that adopt a compliance mode usually do sonic or all of the following to display their commitment to ethical conduct. Make the code of ethics a visible and regular part of communications with employees, implement ethics training programs, appoint a chief ethics officer, have ethics committees to give guidance on ethics matters, institute formal procedures for investigating alleged ethics violations, conduct ethics audits to measure and document compliance, give ethics awards to employees for outstanding efforts to create an ethical climate and improve ethical performance, and or try to deter violations by setting up ethics hotlines for anonymous callers to use in reporting possible violations. Emphasis here is usually on securing broad compliance and measuring the degree to which ethical standards are upheld and observed. However, violators are disciplined and sometimes subjected to public reprimand and punishment, including dismissal. The driving force behind the company's commitment to eradicate unethical behavior normally stems from a desire to avoid the cost and damage associated with unethical conduct, or else a quest to gain favor from stakeholders, especially ethically conscious customers, employees, and investors for having a highly regarded reputation for ethical behavior. One of the weaknesses of the compliance approach is that moral control resides in the company's code of ethics and in the ethics compliance system rather than in an individual's own moral responsibility for ethical behavior. Let's take a look at the characteristics of compliance approach. From light to forceful compliance is favored at companies whose managers lean toward being somewhat amoral but are highly concerned about having ethically upstanding reputations, or are moral and see strong compliance methods as best way to impose and enforce high ethical standards. Emphasis is on securing broad compliance and measuring degree to which ethical standards are upheld. Driving force behind commitment to eradicate unethical behavior stems from a desire to avoid cost and damage associated with unethical conduct, or gain favors from stakeholders from having a highly regarded reputation for ethical behavior. Let us now discuss ethical culture. At some companies, top executives believe that high ethical principles must be deeply ingrained in the corporate culture and function as guides for how we do things around here. A company using the ethical culture approach seeks to gain employee buy-in to the company's ethical standards, business principles, and corporate values. The ethical principles embraced in the company's code of ethics and or in its statement of corporate values are seen as integral to the company's identity and ways of operating. They are at the core of the company's soul and are promoted as part of business as usual. The integrity or the ethical culture approach depends heavily on the ethical integrity of the executives who create and nurture the culture. It is incumbent on them to determine how high the bar is to be set and to exemplify ethical standards in their own decisions and behavior. Further, it is essential that the strategy be ethical in all respects and that ethical behavior be ingrained in the means that company personnel employ to execute the strategy. Why a company can change its ethics management approach? Regardless of the approach they have used to managing ethical conduct, a company's executives may sense they have exhausted a particular mode's potential for managing ethics and that they need to become more forceful in their approach to ethics management. Such changes typically occur when the company ethical failures have made the headlines and created an embarrassing situation for company officials, or when the business climate changes. For example, the recent raft of corporate scandals, coupled with aggressive enforcement or anti-corruption legislation such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which addresses corporate governance and accounting practices, has prompted numerous executives and boards of directors to clean up their acts in accounting and financial reporting, review their ethical standards, and tighten up ethics compliance procedures. Intentionally, amoral managers using the unconcerned or non-issue approach to ethics management may see less risk in shifting to the damage control approach, or for appearance's sake may be a light compliance mode. Characteristics of ethical culture approach. Top executives believe high ethical principles must be deeply ingrained in the corporate culture, function as guides for how we do things around here. Company seeks to gain employee buy-in to company's ethical standards, business principles, corporate values. Ethical principles in company's code of ethics area, integral to day-to-day operations, promoted as business as usual. Let us now study in detail the ethical strategies of companies. Why should companies' strategies be ethical? There are two reasons why a company's strategy should be ethical. One, because a strategy that is unethical in whole or in part is morally wrong and reflects badly on the character of the company personnel involved. And two, because an ethical strategy is good business and in the self-interest of shareholders. Managers do not dispassionately assess what strategic course to steer. Ethical strategy making generally begins with managers who themselves have strong characters. Managers with high ethical principles and standards are usually advocates of a corporate code of ethics and strong ethics compliance, as they are typically genuinely committed to certain corporate values and business principles. They walk the talk in displaying the company's stated value and living up to its business principles and ethical standards. They understand there is a big difference between adopting value statements and codes of ethics that serve merely as window dressing and those that truly palm the white lines for a company's actual strategy and business conduct. As a consequence, ethically strong managers consciously opt for strategic actions that can pass moral security. They display no tolerance for strategies with ethically controversial components. The experiences at Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Health South, Rite Aid, Quest Communications, Arthur Andersen, and several other companies illustrate that when top executives devise shady strategies or wink at unethical behavior, the impact on the company can be severe and sometimes devastating. Linking a company's strategy to its ethical principles and core values. Many companies have officially adopted a code of ethical conduct and a statement of company values. But there's a big difference between having a code of ethics and a value statement that serve merely as a public window dressing and having ethical standards and corporate values that truly paint the white lines for a company's actual strategy and business conduct. If ethical standards and statements of core values are to have more than a cosmetic role, hordes of directors and top executives must work diligently to see that they are scrupulously observed in crafting the company's strategy and conducting every facet of the company's business. In other words, living up to the ethical principles and displaying the core values in actions and decision must become a way of life at the company. Indeed, the litmus test of whether a company's code of ethics and statement of core values are cosmetic is the extent to which they are embraced in crafting strategy and in operating the business on a day-to-day basis. Is what we are proposing to do fully compliant with our code of ethical conduct? Is there anything here that could be considered ethically objectionable? Is it apparent that this proposed action is in harmony with our core values? Are any conflicts or concerns evident? The needs of approaches to managing companies' ethical conduct. Poor ethical choices can possibly ruin an entire business or corporation and affect large groups of people. The most popular example of this is Enron's completely unethical choices that were made, which in turn has made Enron's name synonymous with fraud and unethical behavior. Even though this is an extreme case, it is important to understand that unethical behavior can have extreme consequences. The unconcerned or non-issue approach. Managers using this approach feel that they are only required to comply with what is legally required of them. They feel that it is a waste to spend money or time on establishing ethical standards or ethics training. The damage control approach. This approach tries to prevent any scandals or controversy by hiding behind a code of ethics. Managers using this approach may not be afraid to bend the rules and perform some unethical behavior as long as the public views them as an ethically strong company. The compliance approach. This approach is ethically driven, and managers make sure to have a clear and complete code of ethics and ethics training. Managers try to avoid any immoral situation, and unethical behavior is punished. This approach has its employees just following the rules or ethical standards that are set forth by managers, so they may make some unethical choices if they can find a loophole. The ethical culture approach. This approach has ethics as one of the company's main focus. The company will ingrain their ethical culture to the employee until they do not just follow a code of ethics but embrace it. This does require a rigorous and costly ethics training program, but most importantly, all of the top managers must live by the company's ethical standards and believe them. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. Companies using unconcerned approach ascribe to the view that business ethics is an oxymoron in a dog-eat-dog survival of the fittest world, and that under-the-table dealing can be good business. The main objective of the damage control approach is to protect against adverse publicity brought on by angry or vocal stakeholders, outside investigation, threats of litigation, or punitive government action. The compliance approach is that moral control resides in the company's code of ethics and in the ethics compliance system, rather than in an individual's own moral responsibility for ethical behavior. Many of the trappings used in the compliance approach are also manifest in the ethical culture mode. Managers with high ethical principles and standards are usually advocates of a corporate code of ethics and strong ethics compliance, and they are typically genuinely committed to certain corporate values and business principles.